It is 3:30. Welcome. The chair will call the meeting of the Huntersville Ordinance Advisory Board to order. Attendance. We are missing Barnes, Klutz, and Palillo. Okay. We are now at the approval of the minutes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor? Okay, 6-0. Public comments? We do not have public comments today. Okay, welcome back. It's been a while. If y'all want me to get good at this, we need to do it more often. Before we get into the action agenda, I just want to say really quickly, we had a 6-2 vote in July. And when I first joined the board, I was told after the first meeting that if I had an opinion, whether it was for something or against something, that I needed to make sure that I stated my opinion at some point during the discussion, because the planning board and the town board look to what we've talked about, what we voted, not just what we voted, but what we've said about it. And the only way for them to know why you voted the way you voted is if you tell us. So keep that in mind. I know some of you have no problem at all telling us why you're doing what you're doing, but some of us are a little shyer, and we need to get that in there for them, okay? All right, we got 2 items on the action agenda. 4A is to consider a recommendation on TA, Text Amendment 2306, a request by the Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment to Article 3, Section 3.2.1, D4A, 3.2.2 D4A, 3.2.4 D1E, 3.25 D1D, 326 D4, 3.27 D1D, 3.211 D1D, 3.213 D2C, 3.31 D1, Article 814, and Article 11.1.3 to bring the text into compliance with House Bill 488. Nathan. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As you said, TA 2306 is a proposed text amendment with the aim of coming into compliance with the recently passed State House Bill 488. The bill made changes to the NC Residential Code by including 3-family and 4-family dwellings. There are other changes as well that include permit dollar thresholds for requiring a GC license for construction work, and further changes in order to comply with 160D 804J, which deals with alternative pavement design standards within developments. And in Section 1, we are making amendments to most of the zoning districts just by removing the language 1- and 2-family dwellings in order to stay compliant with the residential code through the future. And in Section 2, we're making changes to 8.14 by adding the language notwithstanding the foregoing. Nothing in this subsection shall be interpreted to conflict with NCGS 160D 804J. And in Section 3, we are making amendments to Article 11.1.3 to come into compliance with the new permit dollar thresholds. And if you guys have any questions, I can try to answer those for you.
On 160D 804J, you can pull that language up. 160D 804J. The way I read our ordinance, it implies that we can impose the most restrictive standards, but that seems to conflict with the statute that says regulations shall not require pavement design standards for new private driveway construction that are more stringent than the minimum pavement design standards adopted by NCDOT. And then there's another out if it's proposed The proposed design is signed by, and sealed by a duly licensed professional engineer. This kind of implies something different.
So from what I understand, our intentions are to just show that nothing within this section is going to conflict with any of the new language. Anything else, if I can point to Emily or Jacob to expand on that? So I'm not sure if I can answer that for you.
So the majority of the design standards are not addressed in our ordinance. They're rather addressed in manuals that are maintained by engineering staff. So that's why we wanted to go ahead and put this caveat in, even though those are not addressed in our ordinance itself, just so that it is there. And obviously, as needed, if needed, then the manuals also will be updated.
So you said it's, I'm new at this, so I'm just asking questions, but you said it's in the manuals. When you refer to manuals, what exactly is that, and what powers do the manuals have?
That is referring to our engineering manuals.
What powers do the engineering manuals have?
That controls our design standards for driveways, streets, sidewalks.
So that's a legally enforceable tool?
Just so we're clear, so the zoning on the subdivision ordinance says you have to put in streets according to town standard. The manual, the engineering manual is probably about that thick with all the details about we need this much asphalt, this much gravel, the pitch, you know, can be no greater. I mean, it has all the engineering data there. So it is a official town policy adopted by the town board, but it provides all the engineering details you need to do to actually carry out a project. Whereas the zoning and the subdivision ordinance just state generalized rules and regulations. Does that help clarify that?
I'm just trying to figure out the legal enforceability of the manual, that's all.
Yeah, yeah, it's adopted policy.
Excuse me. This is just a minor question, but when I'm looking at Section 3, and then subsection C, is it a mistake to have, do I read this correctly, work on a single family, you strike residential and add residence, farm building or commercial building, you've added, and exceeding $5,000. Did you mean to strike
That is
40,000?
a mistake. 40,000 is supposed to be underlined, and that'll be fixed in the future.
As it relates to the 40,000, so that number has changed numerous times between 5,000 and 40,000. Going forward, what is the policy to make sure that we're staying on top of legislative changes to make sure that sort of oversight doesn't happen again?
Right now, we're just conforming to what the state statutes require. In the future, if it changes, we would come back to change those.
Okay, I understand that, but it hasn't been 5,000 in years, and it's gone from 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and we're just now picking this up. What is the process to make sure we're not missing changes like this in the future? What's done in the past is the past, but what are we doing going forward to make sure this sort of oversight of legislative change doesn't happen again?
Going forward, as the state statutes are updated, we'll stay on top of these, and anytime there's changes, we'll come forward and make those changes.
Let me add to that. Previously, we had, well, when I started working here, we had a part-time attorney. Then we had a full-time, now we have attorney. They keep us on our feet. They let us know about the statutes before they're changed to give us a chance to provide input. And then once it's adopted, they're helping prepare the ordinances in many cases. They prepare the ordinance saying, bring this forward. So my response to that question is a proactive town attorney is is something we never had. And that's why things are going to get done pretty much as they get adopted by the state.
Frank?
You know, I don't have 160D here in front of me, but I'm looking at this building permit, go down to number 7. The following work, even if not in excess of $40,000, construction of a deck, a fireplace, a storage building, installation of, the replacement of installation, wood stove or hot water heater. I have to get a building permit to replace my hot water heater?
Correct.
I would ask you to go back and look at that.
Since this might be my last one, I'm going to just keep understand this. Our department issues zoning permits. Mecklenburg Building Standards issues building permits. So you have, these are talking about permits. These are just kind of putting people on notice. You need these permits, and we're trying to keep it up as much as possible. But you can't do anything in Mecklenburg County without getting your building permit from Mecklenburg County Building Standards. The answer to your question is, yeah, you're going to be doing work on that. You need permits for that.
Well, I'm just asking, I'm not questioning here now. I'm asking Planning Department legal to go back and look at 160D about installation of residential wood stoves, or especially water heaters, and someone built. Now, I understand if I build a deck on the back, I've had to get construction permits. But if I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to, I want you to go look at it, please, because I don't think I have to get a building permit to replace a water heater.
Yeah, I think you're wrong, but, yeah, but we will verify that. I wouldn't want you doing work on my gas water heater, let me just say that.
Well, not me.
Well, I think to add on to your point, though, I think even if it does, the real question really is being begged to say, does it make sense for a homeowner? Because what you don't want to do is to have a piece of legislation that nobody's going to be in compliance with.
Well, I agree, but that may be a problem at the state level, but I should have brought that with me, and I did not, because I read through that. I think there's some exception or something there about residential.
There are no more questions?
I have it, Frank. I have what you're talking about. In House Bill 488, Section 160D, 1110, building permits, Section A2, the installation, extension, or general repair of any plumbing system except that in any one or two family dwelling unit, a permit is not required for connection of a water heater that is being replaced if the work is performed by a person licensed who personally examines the work at completion and ensures that a leak test has been performed on the gas piping.
That's the reference I'm referring to.
Same applies with electric. So I concur with Mr. Gammon. This bill needs to be re-reviewed, and I think what we're looking at today
We'll
needs to
review
be
this and go over this.
flushed out and corrected.
No more questions? We're going to review it. Do we have a motion, or what do we do now?
I'll make a motion that we request that staff re-review the bill and ensure that the text amendments that they're bringing before us comply fully with the legislation as approved by the NC legislature.
I'll second.
Discussion, Matt?
Yeah. They're just, as the reasons I've stated during this discussion, I think speak for themselves. There's a number of areas that I think need to be reconsidered and looked at, and for the benefit of applicants and the citizens of Huntersville.
No, Frank?
I don't know that I want to hold it up. I believe that this might be able to move forward with the planning department going back and taking a serious look at that based on the reference that you just quoted. And this will move, and change that, so when it comes to the planning board, that it can be it'll be looked at again. But you made I need to hear what you want to do. That's just my recommendation on the motion.
Just one question, how time-sensitive is this for approval?
We would like to get
I know,
this,
how time-sensitive is it? I know what you'd like to do, but is there a clock ticking somewhere that says it must be done by a given date and time?
so I believe we do have a little extra time because of the upcoming election and not hearing public hearings until later this year or possibly next year.
Commissioner Kovacs.
I was just going to say that I support what you guys are saying. I do think it would be a good idea to clear that up before we get to the next step in this process. If you don't feel comfortable tabling it right now, that is something that I, as a commissioner and the board, would request to be just investigated so we have answers before it does come to us.
Scott.
Is it possible to rework your motion to approve everything but this language as it relates to water heater installation? Does that solve both what you're satisfied with and also give the planning staff opportunity to make everything else conform?
I mean, if you'd like to make a substitute motion, you're welcome to. I would like them to also look at the driveway design standards aspect as well. I think
So
that
it's more
needs,
than, so it's more than just,
yeah. I mean, there's 32 pages of this bill. I think we need to make sure we're addressing everything in there.
okay.
Point out that this section says that these permits are generally required, so it's going to be up to each authorizing agency, i.e. Mecklenburg County. So we would ask that you guys, if you wanted to move this forward, keep it together, that would be great, as opposed to having to split this out to potentially 2 text amendments. We will work with Attorney Sloop and the legal staff to get this tightened up.
Just one question of
Sure.
terminology. I noticed that the legislation at the state does refer to dormitories for migrant dormitories. Sorry, migrant housing. Is the property up here off of Concord, Huntersville considered?
Yes.
It is migrant housing? Okay, what's the implications for that particular project?
That received a special use permit 2 years ago from Metrolina Greenhouse.
Okay.
And they've got a H2A, I don't remember the exact terminology, housing. They work with the government to bring in migrant workers seasonally.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out whether the facility itself, if
Yes.
there's a material change in which, what they would have to comply with.
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, if there is no more discussion,
Thank you.
yes. So the motion on the floor is to table this discussion. If there is no more discussion, let's go ahead and take a vote. All in favor of tabling, raise your hand. Michael, I can't tell if your hand's up. Okay, 4. And if not to table, 2. So 4-2. And if we did not table it, then now, do we have another motion, or do we move on, or?
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it was me, I was paused. 4B is to consider a recommendation for TA 2307, a request by the Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment to Article 12, Section 12.2.1, the word interconnected, to clean up the definition. Patrick.
Now, good afternoon, everyone. So yes, this is a definition cleanup of the definition of interconnected. So in a previous zoning ordinance, we had several images showing different types of street networks. And in 2018, those images were removed due to a previous text amendment and the adoption of the Engineering Standards and Procedures Manual. So those are the images on your screen. The proposed ordinance change is looking to remove the irrelevant text that refers to those removed images. So as it states right now, the definition of interconnected refers to streets which provide through access to other streets. Interconnected street systems may be either rectilinear or curvilinear, and at the end it says see illustrations, Article 5 streets. We're simply looking to remove those words because the illustrations no longer exist in the zoning ordinance. So that is all.
For the small children at home that don't understand, can someone explain the difference in those two?
In rectilinear and curvilinear? So rectilinear would be straight, and then curvilinear would be curved.
The small children don't understand.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I do. I'd like for you to repeat that a little bit, because I'm not sure what you just asked us to decide upon.
So these images were in the zoning ordinance that were then removed in 2018. And along with all of this, several other things were removed. Now, this was an oversight. These C illustrations, Article 5 streets,
Yes.
that currently exist in the definition, we're just looking to remove it as the illustrations are no longer there, so it's not referring to anything anymore.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, well, let's vote. All in favor to make the text recommendation, raise your hand. Okay. And if any opposed? No. Other business. 5A, discuss possible changes to the zoning ordinance related to breezeways and accessory structures. Nathan.
So this is just a discussion to bring to you guys. Eventually, we would like to bring this for a possible text amendment. So first, a quick background on accessory structure language. Currently, the total square footage of all accessory structures cannot be greater than the primary structure's heated first floor area. So for example, if your home is 1,000 square feet, you can put a detached garage or a shed up to 1,000 square feet max. Or you could have two accessory structures, a detached garage or a shed, both equaling 1,000 square feet. And then accessory dwelling units can't exceed 650 square feet of footprint or 50% of the first floor area of principal dwelling, whichever is greater. So again, here, if you had a 1,000 square foot home, you'd be limited to a 650 square foot ADU. And if you had a 2,000, you'd be limited to a 1,000 square foot ADU. ADUs can also be combined with detached garages. So if you had a 2,000 square foot home, you could have a 1,500 square foot detached garage with a 500 square foot ADU on the top. Now getting into what we're discussing, breezeways, this is just a definition that I found in the APA's planner dictionary. So it'd be any open-sided roof passageway connecting two structures, whether a primary or accessory. In the past, staff has used an interpretation allowing accessory structures to be considered attached if connected via breezeway. That's something that we've used up until the past year or two, where we have only been allowing these connections if that breezeway is fully enclosed. So today we're trying to bring this to the zoning ordinance. So some of the issues that we're seeing that has brought this forward is people wanting to build detached garages on their property that are greater than what the zoning ordinance regulates. So something we see often is someone with a 1,000 square foot house, for example, wanting to put in a 2,500 square foot detached garage, and they want to do that by connecting it via breezeway. In the past, we have allowed this, but we are seeing this as an issue moving forward, with people using it as a blatant way to circumvent the zoning ordinance, or build ADUs, or second homes in their front yard or their rear yard. So another example is placing an ADU in their front yard, and they're trying to do that by attaching it via breezeway. Here's some examples in town. This was approved, I believe, in 2016. This is another example. A more recent example. And here's an ADU on top of a detached garage that was recently approved in the front yard, though this project has since been abandoned, so it's not been built. And here's a recent proposal, someone wanting to build I believe it was, I want to say 7,000 square foot detached garage in their rear yard and connected by a 40-foot breezeway. And that's what it would look like on the ground. And another proposal for a 70-foot breezeway. So these are some of the things that we're seeing. Excessively long breezeways through front yards, which completely subverts the intent of the ordinance of keeping the primary structure as the full focal point at the front of the property. So there are around 40 municipalities in North Carolina that we could find that have language that addresses this. And in almost all of them, they use the same language: the connection of two buildings by means of an open porch, breezeway, passageway, carport, or other such open structure with or without a roof shall not be deemed to make them one building. The city of Asheville uses that as well. They also go further and give specifics on the sizes of the buildings attached. Another example is Valdez goes even further by having design standards for their breezeways, limiting height and length. So these are just some of the things that we have looked at and would like to use some of this to craft our own language. So what we're looking to do is to either amend the building definition, like most of the municipalities around North Carolina, or defined breezeways itself. Some of our ideas have been making sure that any structure attached by a breezeway or passageway is not considered part of a primary structure, and possibly limiting the length of any future breezeways to around 15 feet. And we wanted to open this up to a discussion with you guys to see what your thoughts or concerns were moving forward.
What, everything else aside, why would we want to limit the length of breezeways to around 15 feet? I mean, what would cause us to want to do that in the right place for the right reason?
Yeah, so what we have seen people propose, and this is just a concern that staff has had, is specifically people on smaller properties within subdivisions, HOA aside, proposing a 40-foot passageway to connect to a second structure on their property. The purpose of an accessory structure is to be an accessory to the primary building. And if we have a snaking long breezeway going through the property, it seems counter to that point. But we would certainly consider any other options or your guys' opinions.
Now, I'm just trying to think around this. The example you gave would be in a residential area like a homeowner, where a homeowners association, a subdivision.
It could be.
So this, but if we say you can't have it, what, put that back up, limit it to no more than 15 feet? And that's going to apply to every zone in town. And maybe, I don't know, I'm just saying, maybe it's not appropriate for every zone in town. Maybe it's appropriate for some and not for others. Maybe breezeways aren't appropriate in some places. I don't know. I just don't like saying to limit it, just to limit it, have a reason for that. Some of the problems, and I'm sorry, a couple other questions. Some of the other requests that you've had, apparently, these very large buildings, I don't know if they're garage or works or what they are, have some purpose. I mean, what are the purpose are these being built that you're saying? Garages, work sites?
Normally garages for storage. So you're not allowed by the zoning ordinance to run a business out of this. So that would limit your ability to run a workshop that you're selling out of. But, storage of car collections, anything of that nature.
Okay, thank you.
Michael?
Just a quick, maybe either piece of homework, or if you already know the answer, perhaps if you could just kind of take a quick look to see if this were approved by us at a 15-foot, what would that have meant to those applicants that would have come in with longer ones? I mean, how many applicants, and how frequently are you actually seeing it?
Well, I think part of the reason that we see such long breezeways proposed.
I'm not looking for, I'm trying to quantify it, that's all I'm saying. So what's the impact based on numbers? Are you talking about this is going to affect, 40 people would have been impacted by this if we'd have done it last year, or are we talking about 4? It's a big difference between those two. All I'm saying, you don't need to answer it. I'm just simply saying, take a look and see if it really is a material impact on applicants coming in.
And I just wanted to add, on top of that, we'll certainly, consider that. Part of the reason that we see such long breezeways is when people originally proposed these structures, they don't want a breezeway at all. They see breezeway as the sole purpose, the sole way of connecting these structures in order to build the larger ADU or detached garage, or by placing it in the front yard. So we're not actually seeing anyone proposing accessory structures that are compliant with the zoning ordinance be attached via breezeway.
Just to add on to that, because we have denied some of these permits, there's not going to be a way to quantify how many of these would affect. We know 2 or 3 that have been built with what I would say be a moderately sized breezeway, but in the recent past, maybe a year or 2, we've had 6 or 7 folks come in with what I would say abnormally large breezeways as a way to circumvent the ordinance. I know there's, 3 or 4 active ones right now. The folks are pushing on this, and we said, we're just going to pause. We want to issue the permit. We were going to propose a text amendment. That's why we're coming to the group today, to try to get some feedback from you folks.
So if someone wants to build a structure, and the only way they can do that is by creating a breezeway, which creates more impervious surface, it seems like the breezeway is not the problem. It's the way our ordinance is structured. If someone has a 1,000-square-foot older home and they want to build an RV garage, and they can't do that without connecting a breezeway, this gets into reasonable and necessary, flexible and adaptive. Is there substantial bearing to public health, safety, welfare? Which I can't see how this complies with any of that. Maybe we're looking at the wrong thing here. It's not the breezeway. It's what they're trying to get at.
And if the outcome of this group is to change, depending on zoning district size of accessory structures, that's a different discussion. We can go down that path. I'll leave that there. I mean, if you want to look at, say, in the rural zone, you're allowed to have larger accessory structures, that's a path we can go down. That's a text amendment we can explore. But right now, the problem we're having is, can we approve these permits? Should we not, or should we approve these permits? Staff is in the opinion, a 70-foot breezeway is not, you're using that tool to circumvent the intent of the ordinance. And right now, the ordinance states that your primary structure is the primary structure of the, or use of the lot. Accessory structures are just that, they are smaller and subservient to the primary structure and use of the property.
While you discuss this, can you go back to the first screens that we're talking about, the accessory use and the accessory dwellings? Just so, yeah.
Yeah, I can just think of, someone buys a large lot and they have an expectation that they want to build like a large workshop or an RV garage or whatever they want to do. And then because the older home they bought is not of substantial size, they can't do what they want. And they don't understand when when they buy it. And I just, and then where people are finding ways around it, that tells me if everybody's going around the ordinance, that there's something wrong with the ordinance that needs to be taken a look at. And it's not the breezeway here, it's our ordinance related to accessory structures.
Frank?
I just want to be clear. So here you got an example. They can build a detached garage that's 1,000 square feet. Just to be clear, if I connect a breezeway to that, what does that allow? What is that allowing me to do that I'm not already allowed to do?
In the past, it has potentially allowed you to have a larger structure.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to set a standard for, so we
you
can answer that question.
Yes, sir. Have we considered special use permits if someone wants a larger structure?
We have,
Because there may be good reasons for some and others not.
we have not, but that's certainly something we can consider.
The thing that I thought of immediately was, when you bring grandma to live with you and you don't have enough room for grandma, so you want to build her the accessory dwelling unit back there, and maybe she needs the breezeway. It wasn't necessarily the garage or the skirting around the ordinances. So we definitely had different ways of viewing why this might be necessary.
Sure, and also to clarify, ADUs can also be attached to the primary structure as well. So there are other ways to make them larger than just, as a separated accessory structure.
Oops, sorry, Commissioner Kovacs.
Just going back to the beginning, can we talk about the definition of breezeways for a second? Is it a different definition for?
I would say that is just a general definition. That is not.
You got me
we
all
do
caught
not-
up, buddy.
We do not have anything related to breezeways in our
Okay,
ordinance
so,
currently.
because I'm thinking of commercial, and we call these very enclosed places breezeways, so they are different. All right. I had another question, but then I giggled and forgot. It was something that you said. Amy. I don't remember.
You good?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Michael?
A very different perspective on this, and that is that for communities, neighborhood types of setting, does the EPA stormwater requirements is affected by this? Because if it is a small lot to begin with, I would assume that you're taking away, the ability for the stormwater to be absorbed into the ground, and now it's being displaced. How is that treated as part of this?
Well, any time you add a covered structure, it would count towards your impervious limit, which would affect how much you can put on the property as well.
Okay, so for small properties, basically, this is a moot point, because
It could be, depending on how much impervious they have.
But those limits really, make sure I'm right, those limits really only affect the McDowell Creek, Gar Creek watershed to,
I'm sorry. Hold on just a minute.
those only affect the Gar Creek and McDowell Creek watershed that goes to Mountain Island Lake. Over on Yadkin Riverside, on the west side of town, that it doesn't impact. Is that correct?
No, the stormwater quality, or the stormwater ordinance could apply, which limits them to 12% unless they decide to go to a higher density option. It also depends what subdivision they are in. Some subdivisions have BMPs, which would have impervious restrictions.
So I'm learning something. So you're telling me someone in In the rural area, our Northstone has an impervious limit on what they can have on their property?
Northstone would not because of the date it was built, but anything after, do you remember the date? I think late 1990s would have to comply with the stormwater ordinance.
So even if they're not in one of the overlays?
Correct.
Okay, I learned something.
Go ahead.
I remembered. I did perk up at the idea, I think it was you, Mr. Gammon, of a special use permit, because I can see where some of the larger accessory units would be needed depending on what they're for. But going back to what Mr. Jones said, I think it's important to look at this as a whole. And if you guys need to work on, I hear them saying breezeways is what they're up against right now with some stuff coming in, so I don't know if you guys are comfortable with hashing that out, so that way they have something in the interim until you really dive deep into it as a whole. But I do like the idea of special use permit.
So if we're going to discuss the idea of special use permits, unless something's changed, the way we get those is quasi-judicial? Is that what we're still looking at? Okay, just something to keep in mind. Frank?
No, but I was saying, it's not really us, they've asked just
Well,
for
surely.
input while they're developing this. They don't have a developed product, they're just asking for other ideas.
Yeah.
And I would like to add as well that at least in the meantime, or whether anything addresses in the future the size requirements for accessory structures, we would still like to define whether a structure attached via a breezeway is an accessory or a primary structure. If we later down the road allow detached garages larger than currently, someone still may want something even larger, so we still may have this issue. So having something to define what it is or what it allows would at least make this clear for staff going forward with permitting.
And my last comment is that I would want to see something that doesn't overregulate, that allows some flexibility, so that it's not one size fits all, because depending on the zoning and what it's for.
There could be a minimum lot size that has a special set of standards to allow for a larger accessory structure at some multiple of the primary residence, and then on, smaller lots, there's a different standard. Because when someone buys one of the, if they buy a 5-acre parcel with a 1,000-square-foot house on it, and they expect to build, a 5,000-square-foot barn, and we don't let them, and that was the purpose they bought it for, you got to kind of question what our ordinance is doing here, so.
I think Frank kind of touched on it when he made his comment, and that is that perhaps maybe what one needs to look more closely at is what's the ultimate use of the structure that's being built. I mean, because if the structure has a very defined intent and it's not a living structure, it's a different type structure than my house. So why are we trying to connect the house with whatever this new oversized structure will be versus simply saying what structures are permitted and not permitted based on what their uses are, as opposed to a connecting point to a primary facility?
So, I'll just be clear that anything on a residential property and additional can only be an accessory structure or an ADU. No business can be run, so the only uses can be used for storage or anything related to, like a pool or something like that. So we can't allow anything further unless change the zoning.
It wasn't to defend the current position as much as it simply says we need to probably look at other structures that are built on property and what their ultimate use is and how we want to treat them. I don't want to say it's a house when it's not a house, because that's what we're saying now. It's a house. Everything's a house connected to the house. And that doesn't make sense.
I agree with Michael on that. what I was going to say, that I think it matters as to what the unit's being used as, and I know we don't want to have even more code enforcement people looking around what's going on in people's backyards, but I think it is important as to what the structure is. I mean, you know, storage versus a garage are maybe pretty similar, and a barn is, you know, maybe so too, but when it breaks off and becomes a mother-in-law apartment or something like that, then it needs to probably have different goals and guides in mind. Yes, sir.
If I restate what you and you, Mr. Chairman, have said, the inverse of that is, if one is trying to achieve a means of having two buildings treated as one building, and the method is, if I had a breezeway, then I'm somehow able to make it all one building, then the way to break that up is to not allow a breezeway to cause two structures to be defined as one structure. I mean, that's the original sin, is that if I add a breezeway, then I can get around some otherwise practical restrictions. And so if we break up that definition a bit, or allow some latitude in the definition of it, then I think it may make a pathway to a more logical outcome, more practical.
But I would then, I mean, I agree with that. But then I would ask, since you're looking at this, is there a case somewhere where it would make them one building? I think you have to consider that too, to be flexible. I'm not saying it would be, but I'm just saying you would have to look to see, is there some case, and what would be the circumstances where we could, the zoning ordinance, the planning department could determine that, yeah, okay, we can see that that's one building.
Yeah, and we look at this in case law, and there's issues like out at the beach where foundations are tied in, so you get a lot of larger rental properties at the beach, if they've got a common foundation, and they just have dissimilar structures with some open area in between, like a breezeway or a patio, screened-in porch. So we've looked at some of those things, and again, that's how we arrived. We're allowing folks, if it was attached, sharing a foundation with that breezeway, 10, 20 feet, okay, we can consider it part of the house, but now these folks are going 20, 30, 40, 70 feet. Now you're circumventing the intent of the ordinance. So that brings us back to here. And you guys have given us some great feedback, and we appreciate that, and we'll tighten some things up and bring some ideas back to you guys in the future. And we do have one more question, comment.
So this is for you guys, is there a specific reason that we use the ground floor square footage and not the entire square footage if it's a two-story home?
I do not know how we came up with that. I can certainly, we can certainly meet and come up with that. I don't know if you guys are aware of how we come up with that.
But not everything falls under impervious space, like we just said. Some of the homes built before the mid-90s.
Or it might impact the footprint of the house. So if you had 2,000 square feet, you built a one-story building at, 2,000 square feet?
I have an example, but I just want to know.
Yeah, no, so actually that's been part of the code since '96, so before any of us got here, it's just been simply the first floor area has always been the measuring stick and not the second or third floor of that. So that's just been the ordinance.
For an
since-
example, I can think of a two-story home being on an acre lot, and the bottom floor is only 1,000 square feet, but the whole house is 2,000 square feet. The next door neighbor's on a half-acre lot. They have a 2,000 square foot, one-story home, so they can technically build more on a smaller lot than the home that actually has a larger lot, because we're only looking at the bottom floor and not the. So I think that's something we need to kind of look into too, because if you should be able to take the whole square footage if you're making decisions like that.
There's no more discussion. Ms. Sloop, was there something?
So right now, we are not scheduled to have an HOAB meeting next month. So I thought it would be helpful for us to basically use time efficiently to go back to the item that there was some confusion about before. Nathan, if you can pull that back up. And that way, because we're finishing early, if we stop now, we might not have to meet next month if we can clear this information up for you.
Did you want a specific?
Right here. Okay. So we talked about whether or not this complies with the statutes, and it does. If you read the first portion of this section, it essentially says that no development shall occur except pursuant to a building permit when one is required. Also, it says a building permit is generally required for the activities below. So we didn't find it prudent to add the lengthy exception language about residential homes into this section because it would just add to the length of this section, and it's a little bit convoluted. So there's no need to put the specifics in there about the hot water heater because, again, it says generally required and when one is required. The county who handles our building permitting is not going to require a building permit when one is not required by law. So even though that specific language that Frank and Matt were talking about from, I believe it's 160D 110, I had it here on my phone. What did I do with it?
A2.
So 160D 1110A2. Again, that language is specific to residential 1 and 2 family dwellings, and it is very specific. So that's why we wanted to draft it this way, so as not to confuse. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Well, it's actually North Carolina State Building Code, which would encompass the commercial and the residential code as they're splitting it, so it would apply to commercial, it appears.
Well, the section you were specifically talking about earlier. We just didn't feel like it made sense to insert that huge chunk of language into the ordinance. That's why it's drafted as it is.
It's just that,
Okay, well, for those following along at home, we're back to 4A. Go ahead.
it's just that the way Section 3.1, Part 7 implies that you have to have a building permit for a hot water heater.
If it
when
were
the
read,
statute says the opposite.
if it were read solely based on subsection 7, but if you read the beginning of that section, when it clearly states generally required, and also when it says when one is required. So really, the language is not going against anything that's in 160D 1110A2. It's just we didn't feel, again, that it was prudent to insert that big chunk of language into this section of the ordinance. And again, the county handles building permitting, and they are not going to require a building permit when it's not legally required.
My only question for this, and I hear you, is when we are talking about someone who is not, maybe it's a homeowner who can do these things, do they call the county and say, am I going to need a building permit? I mean, do they call, I mean, because if they look at this, they don't know whether they do or not.
Yeah, and so, again, as far as the permits go, for the most part, it's going to be contractors that are seeking the permits. But there's also information available on the county's website that goes into more detail about building permitting.
Okay.
And that is kind of building on as a homeowner doing stuff, you have questions. If you go to Mecklenburg County Building Standards, they have a FAQ that is outstanding. I mean, it really gives you all kinds of information about when do I need a permit, when don't. They also have a hotline that you can call to check. So the breadth of material that the Mecklenburg County Building Standards provides for homeowners is really excellent. And so I often, when people call or talk to me, I just refer them to that website and say, your answers are here.
Okay.
So if you all would, anyone on the board like to make a motion to reconsider and go ahead and move forward with making a recommendation on these simple statutory house cleaning issues, then we wouldn't have to come back and have a meeting for the one item.
I'm not opposed to that, but even if we moved it forward, Emily, I would still like for you guys to take a look. There may be a need to put some wording in here, and I would like you to take a look at that to clarify, because if you read it this way, I mean, I don't replace hot water heaters. I call someone like somebody that's certified and licensed to do it. I like to live. I don't want to blow my house up. I don't mess with the gas. But there may be, I don't know if there's something else in there that needs to be taken a look at that, and then I trust you guys to go back through there and do that. But I don't mind moving this forward if I know that it's going to be looked at and possibly some wording. I don't mind if some wording's changed in this. It wouldn't add that much to the ordinance, and it would clarify some things.
Anyone else? Matt?
There was this in 160D 804J, we had also asked to be looked at too.
Yeah, and so again, just to clarify on this one as well, our ordinance does not address the design standards. It is all in the engineering manual because they're very technical, highly technical. And as Jack mentioned, it's pages upon pages upon pages. So we don't want the zoning ordinance to be convoluted by that level of detail. That's why we thought it was a good idea to at least put a caveat here, but if the actual standards need to be updated, they will be updated in the manual itself, which governs as a policy the design standards.
Finished with discussion or questions? Does anybody else? Frank?
I make a motion to reconsider the previous motion made by Matt on text amendment 23-06.
Okay, do we have a second? I'll second. We have a second? Yes.
Discussion?
Discussion?
Yeah, just let the record note that I feel there are technical problems with what staff has presented, and I feel like there needs to be a complete review of the legislation to make our ordinance become compliant with the relevant legislation.
Michael?
Friendly amendment to ensure that staff doesn't get left off the hook. To amend yours is just, to approve it with an understanding that staff within the next 3 months will come back with the clarification as requested by board member.
So what I'm asking is, do you want to reconsider this item, make a recommendation today? You can caveat the recommendation with, I want staff to re-review it, but I would say, can we move this forward to the next step versus holding it up here for next month's meeting?
I'll withdraw my friendly amendment and allow the existing amendment on the floor to move forward.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Okay, can we vote then?
We clarify the motion that's been made?
The motion is to reconsider text amendment 20, to reconsider the previous motion regarding 23-06, which means we would make a new motion, correct?
Yes.
If that passes.
Okay, all in favor to reconsider TA 2306? Okay, any opposed? Okay. Any new motions?
I'll make a motion. I recommend approval of text amendment 23-06. What if you go back to the previous slide? I appreciate it. Thank you. I recommend approval of text amendment 23-06 with the caveat that the staff and legal, which is staff, go back through HB 488 and items pertaining to 160D
804J.
and 4J, and ensure that the wording and as written in the current ordinance is in concurrence with that, in concurrence with the state statute.
We have a motion? Do we have a second? We have a second? Okay. And let's vote.
Back to my friendly amendment again, because that was pretty open-ended. It doesn't really give a window of time in terms of when we're going to come back. If somebody wants to amend to add a time frame to it, that'd be great.
At the next ordinance advisory board meeting. I can't give a date because I don't know when that is.
So again, you all are moving this forward in the next step, meaning it won't come back to HOB. Correct. And at that time, we will have that information if any changes are needed, and we'll also update HOB as to any changes that were made as well.
All right, then strike the portion of adding the Huntersville Ordinance Advisory Board.
Michael, are you good?
I have nothing else to say. I mean, it's all been said.
All right, then let's vote. All in favor of the motion to go forward for TA 2306 to recommend it go forward with the caveat that staff will consider and make sure that it does work with the ordinance for the state? Raise your hand, sorry. Okay, and anybody opposed? Okay, and one abstain. All righty, we have come through this agenda 1 1/3 time. Can we have one more motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
All right, everybody in favor of adjourn? Raise your hand. All right, any opposed? No. Although I'd like to have a meeting next month. Okay. What a mess.